Good morning, everybody. I'm Martin de Belder. So people refer to me as the clinical lead. I'm actually the chair of what we call the NOM, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The NCAP, the National Cardiac Audit Program Operational and Methodology Group, which is a bit of a mouthful. And actually, I represent, in NCAP, we have 6 cardiovascular audits. We have others as well, which we'll talk about. And my job is to try and herd all of that lot together, the clinicians and the clinical leads, and we'll make some introductions in a minute of who's here, to try and actually create a national program that is harmonized and useful to everybody. So we have a couple of pictures. I wanted 2 pictures of the NICOR team, one at work and one at play, but in fact the only pictures I've got, they're both at play. But they do occasionally do some work. But I thought I'd introduce 1 or 2 of the team who are here today. So right at the back there is James Chow. Do you want to stand up just a minute? James Chow is the Chief Operating Officer, who is his responsibility to make it work, so if it doesn't, he's the man to blame. We have at the back there with a bow tie on, with his badge, Anthony, do you want to stand up? Anthony Bradley is the Senior Project Manager. We have Kelly O'Brien somewhere in the room. I think here's Kelly, who's our communications lead and stakeholder engagement lead. So as we go along today, if any of you got questions, particularly for any of these individuals, please clobber them. And we've also got Al Fahad Abdul Mamoumi here, Al, Big Al, who's one of our analysts. So if you've got any problems about how we do analysis, then you can attack Al. On the clinical side, we've got myself. I'm a sort of overarching lead, but we've also got representation from Andrew Goodwin. Do you want to stand up? He's our clinical lead for the National Adult Cardiac Surgery Audit. And we have Clive Weston, who is the clinical lead for the Myocardial Ischemia National Audit Project, MyNAP. So we've got some representation. So you have specific questions or even generic questions about programs, these are the people to clobber. So data. It's really good to see some of my old friends and colleagues from James Cook, where I used to be, and we used to have, they're in a little porter cabin at the back called the Red Shed, which used to be, I referred to as the powerhouse of the unit. And it was all about data and the use of data. So we always use I've spent my whole life looking at data to try and see if we're providing good services. But the issue about audit is performance, is how are we performing? And it could be a team phenomenon, are we doing a good job? It could be me personally, am I doing a good job? And also then when we look at results, if they aren't as good as they should be, what can I do or what can we do as a team to actually get better? And actually the other thing that I've got a bit of a bee about is that actually even if my results are okay, how can we be better still? Because actually there's one issue about the National Audit Project is that we could all be really good and equal in mediocrity, and we shouldn't be all about mediocrity. We should be about trying to be really good. So are we doing a good job? But also if we are found not to be doing a good job, how do I go about improving? And what would my reaction be actually if my results, my own personal results, weren't as good as I expected them to be? But more importantly, what would I want my colleagues' performance to be, or even more importantly, the patients and how they should respond? Now, I was an interventional cardiologist. I've stopped doing the intervention now because I'm a bit of an old fart. But obviously, both with interventional cardiology and cardiac surgery, the results of individual operators, and actually it's not an operator, it's a team around that operator, are put into the public domain now. So it all gets a bit personalized, but actually performance is important, and being in the public domain, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'll come back to that in a minute. So Sir Bruce Keogh used to be the medical director of the National Health Service. Some of you may have forgotten him already because we come and go. But anyway, Bruce Keogh was a cardiac surgeon. And he actually got his knighthood really because he was the individual who drove the National Society in Cardiac Surgery to put their results into the public domain. And he was then made national director, and he was then, one of his missions was to actually bring that mentality into the whole of the NHS. And of course it's led on from there. I can't remember which year it was, but 10 specialties were selected for that particular program. Interventional cardiology joined cardiac surgery, but now there are 24 programs that actually have performances of individual operators in the public domain. So how are we going to improve practice? If we're going to improve practice, we've got to have a clear idea about our current performance. So if we don't have any data to tell us what our current performance is, how on earth can we improve? So you then would need to know what ideal performance is. Can we break down the art of cardiology into a series of steps which we can measure, and then can we put a standard that we ought to be achieve, or a goal? Hopefully they'll be evidence-based, but if they're not, it could be a consensus agreement. And then you should measure against your standards, and then also what other stimulants could we use. We can see who's performing well and try and flag up what it is about that particular group that actually seems to be doing so well. And obviously, if there's a lag in performance, can we get everyone behind to say, what can we do to do better? So how are we performing against national standards? How are we performing against similar centres? When we had HQIP, which I'll come to in a minute, ran a little conference in February last year, and trusts were there, and the trust management team said what they want from national audits. But they do want to know how they're doing against the national standards. They want to know how they're doing with other centres. What they really want to know is, A, how they're doing against like centres, and actually the other thing they want to know is how they're doing against their local competitors. And they certainly need to know if there's a problem that needs fixing. However, we have to be mindful of the fact that the management teams in trusts are bombarded with information, not only from their local teams and networks, dashboards and so on, but they're getting information on 40 audits. So they're kind of scanning the results, and if they see a big problem, they'll focus on it. But actually, that's not just the right way about QI. They'll go and do a big fix on a big problem. But actually, you locally should be figuring out what you should be doing as a local team. And you may not know about actually how you interpret information and then start to improve it. And one of the things today is to take the expertise of the UCLP team. I have to say, UCL Partners are a fantastic organization. They've given us an enormous insight into how we should try and promote change, and that you'll have a lot to learn from them today. The other thing, of course, is to think about what patients want. And patients do actually look into the information. They do look on the web. They do look to see the results of the local hospitals. They want information about their condition. They want clear explanations of what they should expect when they're a patient. They want easy to understand results available to them. And they want more information about what options they've got for their disease processes and how you can compare one form of option with another. And it's not just about whether they're going to survive an operation, it's whether they might get complications, what's the impact of those complications, how long are they going to be in hospital, how long does it take to recover. And when you get this sort of information, informatics, then you can have this concept of shared medical decision making when they're actually trying to consent to procedures. So we need to give them more than just whether they're going to be alive or dead. The other thing is to just differentiate quality assurance against quality improvement. So quality assurance is we're all doing a good job, and actually the UK is doing a good job. So there is a public confidence thing. Is the NHS providing good care? But occasionally you get the, in inverted commas, scandals that pop up from time to time because people take their eye off the ball, or they're measuring one thing, but they're not actually measuring something which is equally important or more important. And then quality improvement is raising the bar, and that could be that it's going to save lives, it could be that it's more effective treatment, or it could be more efficient treatment, certainly more patient-centered, more timely treatment, and fairer treatment. So there are all sorts of ways that you can improve. And Mike's already talked about the audit cycle. You guys in this room should know about the audit cycle, and I'm not going to go on about it. Just to remind you that the audit data sets in NICOR, we'll come to the domains in a minute, the data sets are all designed to follow a patient from admission to hospital for an episode to the discharge from hospital. And we design the audit so that nationally we can look at the structure, how many hospitals are doing what sort of treatment. We can see if we can get a handle on appropriateness. Is it right that people are or are not getting a particular form of treatment? We're looking to see how treatments are delivered, and then we want to know the outcomes. And you all know the particular cycle. But added into that is professional reporting in the cardiovascular domain. And you want to try and get changes. So what do we hold in NICOR, which is the National Institute for Cardiovascular Outcomes Research? It's a sort of a virtual phenomenon, if you like. It's a bringing together of multiple stakeholders. So we have all the clinical leads and the experts about their particular programs, but we also have people who are interested in the data. and we'll come back to the back in a minute. But we have 2 disease-specific audits. That's heart attacks, MINAP, and heart failure, the National Heart Failure Audit, and then 4 treatment-specific audits. So that's congenital heart disease interventions and operations, angioplasty, cardiac surgery, and cardiac rhythm management. So that's pacemakers, ablations, ICDs, and CRT-D treatments. And if you like, we've got a sort of grave for birth to grave concept as we go through a life cycle. And of course, if we've got every patient in, which is the idea, you can track patients through their whole lifetime of disease. So data is collected. We need administrative details. We have clinical descriptors. We have the indication for treatment where it's applicable, what treatments are provided, the timings, the complications, outcomes, and then we also collect additional information about hospital infrastructure. And there is a downside, because if you're only tracking the data up to hospital discharge, what about all that information beyond discharge? Well, we do that through linkage, and so we go to NHS Digital and we link to the ONS data for mortality and the HES data, and although we're not particularly expert at that, we're trying to get better at that so we can actually look at readmissions, rehospitalizations, and for what reason. And we also have the ability, and this is extremely important for the research community at the moment, to link to other data sets. So we could link to diabetes, renal, stroke, vascular surgery, and others. How's this all put together? Well, we've been collecting data in the cardiovascular world since 1970-something. The pacemaker guys were the first to actually start putting data together. And at that time, it was building up. Quite a lot of hospitals had information that was not done on a patient-level data. So angioplasty, I ran the national angioplasty audit for 5 years. We were simply bean counting. How many angioplasties did you do and what sort of patients and how well were you doing? But actually, in terms of trying to get together, a number of like-minded individuals said we should be doing this together, not separately, because everyone was in their separate camps. So the cardiovascular family were brought together, and it was really around about 2000 that things began to take off. Actually, it was when Alan Milburn was the health secretary, and they made a strategic decision that they did want to collect national information, and after a previous pilot study, a decision was made that they would put MINAP into every hospital in the country. And so MINAP's got it going. The other registries were told to get their data sets in order and to come on board. So angioplasty and cardiac surgery came on 2002. This is now patient-level data. So that's every patient in has got a line in the data set. And then we go to heart failure that came in 2006, 2007. And we've had various other things. The congenital portal was launched in 2007. Now, we also run some other registries. So we run the TAVI registry as well. That's funded in a slightly different way. And we also ran a thing called the Commissioning Through Evaluation programs, where new technologies like left atrial appendage occlusion, those are going to be routinely commissioned now, and NICOR is going to be collecting data on those particular treatments as well. And in 2017, NICOR came into 2011. NICOR as an institution came into being, and it was part initially at University College London, but in the second round of contract with the government, it was actually put together into an NHS-facing organisation. So we're now hosted at the Barts Health NHS Trust. So this is the building in St Martin's-le-Grand that we're in, and the Barts Heart Centre is behind us. And this is the thing. John Deanfield is our director, and there are various contact details here, but you can clobber us as we go along. Now, it takes quite a lot to actually put together a national programme. You've got to think about the governance side of things. That's information governance, flow of data. You've got to have project managers. You need an IT platform. You've got to have help desks. You've got to have data managers. You've got to have analysts. You've got to have statistical expertise. You have clinical oversight. And one important thing in NICOR is that you had to bring all these elements, in particular the clinicians. So this is not a management-led process. This is a clinically led process. And there is, of course, the research potential. So we have a lot of stakeholders. So you, the clinical community, and patients are one group of stakeholders, but actually researchers are stakeholders, Public Health England are stakeholders, NHS England want information from us, a whole host of people want information from us. So there's a board that brings all of that together. There are regulators, the CQC, the MHRA, and various other individuals want information from us. So they all feed into a board, and then the board, through the development of the team, starts to create that. So I basically chair this thing called the Operational and Methodology Group, and then we have 6 big domains. That's TAVI is separate, but the big 6 domains now fall under that. They each have a clinical lead, and they have what we call a domain expert group. So these were the old steering groups, if you like, for each lead. So MINAP still has, if you like, a steering group, and so on. So Clive runs MINAP, but the domain expert group is meant to be the body of individuals and the expertise around the country that he needs to advise him on how to run a good national program. And they review the clinical evidence, try and work out how we can keep contemporary, and that creates problems to us as we shift data sets over time. We may have time to talk about that later. And then, having created an audit program, you give it to the delivery group, and James and Anthony run that group to actually make sure that the team behind that can actually do all the number crunching and start spitting out information. Now, if you're going to create data, you need good data in. If you have rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So we need good data in, and we need complete data. So in the past, we've tried to concentrate in the reports, the old reports, about some degree of data completeness. So you used to have these charts, color-coded charts as to how well you were doing on data completeness. This was a story as we ran from thrombolysis to primary angioplasty in the UK, but how good were people giving us the information? Some centers are brilliant, and some centers are rubbish. I've always taken a little view that the centers that are rubbish at data are probably not quite so good as they should be clinically, but I've never had that proven. But I do think it creates an ethos of whether you are really involved in caring about the product that you've got available. So data completeness and data quality are really important. And then in the old days, we used to produce what some people refer to rudely as the doorstep reports, which were these big, thick reports that got published and sent around. Mike rudely said that they used to collect dust on shelves. Certainly locally, we used to have to take these, and we had the audit lead, who's not here today, from James Cook, used to go through the data and extract the data that he wanted that was going to be useful to the organization. So it wasn't, these reports were great and they gave a national state-of-the-art picture, but they didn't give hospitals necessarily what they wanted to say. How were they performing? So these reports are very useful, and they've told us an awful lot about the practice of cardiology in this country and cardiothoracic surgery, but they're not really designed to help with a quality improvement tool. We fed data into NHS Choices when they existed, and there were various other things that came out, like an app to help cardiac surgeons talk to patients about looking into the live database to see how patients like them would do at an operation. And over time, we were able to look at things. So here's particular areas over time that we can see the national improvements in time to angiography for non-STEMI patients, or the improvements in mortality over time for patients with heart attack. We can see the growth in angioplasty. There's been a slight fall down in the number of operations. And the question is, why is that? Now, for the first time, and I'm probably going to leak, we're seeing a little bit of a downfall in some, a downsizing in all revascularization procedures. And that might be all sorts of reasons for that. It might be that the prevention program is beginning to bite. It may be that actually the ischemia trial says that not so many people need to have revascularization in the first place. But there is, it's not always getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Anyway, we felt that when I came down to be more involved with this program, we had to change the way that we did the reports. And UCLP have been fundamental in terms of getting us to change the thinking. So we don't have 6 separate reports now. We don't produce published reports. It's all online. It's a single report. We try to have it as a single aggregate report picking out particular themes, but we still, for those people who say, I want to know how we're doing with heart attacks, I want to know how we're doing with congenital heart disease, there are still the separate specialty reports underneath them. We feed the COP, which is what we call the public transparency agenda. And then we're also trying to work out how we can create reports at a trust level and also for commissioners. And we've also promised the devolved nations that we'd produce reports specific for Wales, Scotland, and so on, whoever's participating. And so in 2019, for example, we had the combined NCAP annual report with all its domains. And for the first time last year, we published a specific patient and public report. Kelly and various colleagues were highly instrumental in producing that. And one of the writers, Richard Fitzgerald, was one of our patient representatives, unfortunately died before it was published. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that patients and carers have a real interest in this. They have a real interest in what's going on. And also these individuals put an awful lot of time and effort into trying to get this program together. So it's people like Rick that actually help us to shape where we're going with this program. So we still have all of the separate subspecialty domain reports online. But what are we trying to do? We're trying to do fewer words, so the essays are getting shorter, we hope. We're trying to get more graphics and pictures into that tell a story. We've got some infographics. We have certainly tried to convert it into a quality improvement focused type reporting strategy, which we weren't doing before, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And we're trying to create links to the evidence, so you can say, what's the evidence for this particular metric, why are we bothering, and then making some clear recommendations. So for the last time, I was a great believer. Years and years ago, we used to sort of create league tables, and everyone went away from league tables because they said statistically they don't mean anything, and you could be bottom of a league table, but statistically just as good as somebody who's top of the league table. So we went into funnel charts, and I'm sure all of you in the room know all about funnel charts, and funnel charts actually have a real value. However, when you're trying to push quality improvement, the danger is if you're all in the funnel and you're all okay, you could all be equally as mediocre as each other. And so it's not really a tool designed to push standards. So we've gone back to league tables, or we're going back to league tables, and we're going to put a big bar somewhere in the middle saying this is what you should be aspiring to. And so there's a metric up there. This is the number of patients who have an echo during admission for hospital with a heart attack. The centers upstream of the bar, they've hit the target. The centers below have not hit the target. And when you see the variation in performance from hospital to hospital, it's pretty spectacular. So even though nationally you can be fooled to say we're getting better and better, actually performance around the country is really quite remarkably different. Now that may be that you're not putting the data in. Well, that's your problem. We can only give you back what you're giving to us, but actually we know for sure from feedback this is real. So actually performance is not as good in some hospitals as it should be. We're trying to give trends as to what's happening over time so you can get a bit more information about that. Here's one example, radial artery access with angioplasty. Some studies in the emergency setting say you save lives by this, and you certainly have fewer complications. So the national story, we're up to 87% of people having radial access for angioplasty now. That's pretty spectacular as a country. Not everybody should have radial access because there are some procedures you can't do from the wrist. But actually, when you look at the variation, you still have some hospitals that are way, way down. And you go to those hospitals and say, well, we're waiting for Mark Belder to retire because he just won't learn the new techniques. But the fact is that there are some hospitals that just need to shift. Here's day case angioplasty, for example. So for elective angioplasty, do you really need to come in the night before? Why can't you just come in? Well, you have to start planning that to make sure they're consented properly, they've been seen properly. You need to work out the administration of that and make sure the beds are available and so on. But you can do it, and so we start to see a climb. But when you actually look at that, you've got some centers that are now doing it routinely for every elective case, and you've got other hospitals that don't do it at all. So if this is a good thing, and I think it probably is, I was actually a bit worried about the idea of day case angioplasty. Not so much as bringing them in the night before, but sending them home that night. But actually, with stenting and with all the drugs we've got available now, it's safe, it's effective, it's more efficient, patients want it, let's deliver it. The clinical outcomes program has caused an awful lot of tension and excitement over the years because it's been focused and the surgeons led the way, but they've had to go through the pain of having individual surgeons being blamed at having low mortality, high mortality rates. Well, we have to remember the cardiac surgeon is simply one part of a team of individuals that are delivering that care. But actually, when you start to look at these programs and you start to see little drifts in the wrong direction, And if you then go into those things, you will find that there's a team phenomenon problem going on at these institutions. So actually, it's important that we have this. The public actually want this. It builds up public trust. If I had wanted a bypass operation, I had to go to see Andrew, and he was a new kid on the block. I would have to hope that he'd been trained properly to be there. But on the other hand, I might want to just have a little look at how many he does and what his results are like. So if he's done 3,000 operations and he's got a mortality of 1%, that's going to do for me. But if actually he's done 3 and he's got a 50% mortality, I think I might choose a different surgeon. So actually, it's important that we provide this information. And it does allow you, there's a thing called the Hawthorne effect. When you're under inspection, you tend to perform better. There's an adverse side of it. You can be risk averse and you have to watch out for that. But actually, in general, you do perform better if you know you're being looked at. So we have certain ways of reporting that. This is the old way of reporting angioplasty results. So you had a bar chart that gave you the confidence intervals around your complication rates and your mortality. And you were, if you were in the bar, in the box, that was good. We're actually changing for our statistical methods now to a thing called forest plot. So you'll have a line, and basically, if when these results come out, if you've got a black line, you're okay. And if you've got a red line, you're not okay. So you need to avoid red lines. So there's different ways of delivering this information. It's been a bit confusing for the surgeons and the interventionists to get their head around this, but we think we know what we're doing. Okay, however, if we're going to start giving information back to people, we need to be able to giving it. It's no point giving a result, and sometimes by the time you go through writing the report, getting it put down, getting it approved by NHS England and HQIP, and then putting it out into the public domain, it's already a year late. So people, you say, you're not doing so well, and they say, oh, we've changed, we're doing much better anyway. So actually, if we really want to start showing people how they're performing, you want to do it how they're performing now. Well, you can't do that unless you've got data coming in now. So one message from today is that we actually need, to be a more effective program, we need to have a much more rapid ability to get data in. Now, all of you will be sitting there and saying, we're doing it the best we can, and we've had our colleagues, as they've retired, they've not been replaced. Well, I had to fight all of that for years and years and years at James Cook to get the Red Shed team, and I see they're all being whittled down now. So you hope there are clinical champions in these trusts that realize the importance of this and actually fight to get those teams, because they're fundamental to actually the whole of this process. So we need data going in. Now, you're all worried then about the fact that it may not be valid data. You're just putting it in, there might be some mistakes. That doesn't matter. It matters for when you're doing a COP program and putting out individual surgeons. They want validated data. But that's okay. We can do that as an end-of-year process. There's no real reason, actually, why we can't do it as a continuous process if we change the validation cycle. But what we've done in the past, we've probably made a mistake. We've been too generous to you. We've allowed you, give us the data, we have a timetable, and we say, can you have your data? And where the expectation, the NICOR rule is that if a patient has gone home from hospital, we expect that data to be in the database within 3 months. Do most of you comply with that? Not very much. And I'll come back to that. But if we're going to get that patient needs to be in the database really as fast as possible. And even if you've got changes and tweaks to be made, you can make them as you go along, because it will simply overwrite what you put in beforehand. But get the data in as early as you possibly can. But when we looked at how centers download to NICOR, it was pretty disappointing. We would like you to use the NICOR front end, the web-based front end, as much as possible. In MyNap, 70% of the hospitals do. But James Cook has a bespoke data system. Other people use Tomcat, Dendrite, and various other commercial partners. They have input and export processes to do that. But when you look at the data dumping, we have some trusts that only dump data once a year. Well, we can't do a continuous report if they're only going to give us once yearly data. Some people do it 3 monthly or 6 monthly. But we actually just need, as a patient is done, get the patient into the database. What we're going to do then is to try and do 2 things. First of all, we've created a new tool. So in the old system, which was a Lotus Notes system, we've actually changed the platform now to a technology called CureEdge 5. There's a reason for that, but that allows us to do a lot more things. So one thing we will be doing for you is a data completeness tool that's already designed. It's going to be rolled out for angioplasty and cardiac surgery by Easter. and you will be able to, I haven't got a slide to show you today, but you'll be able to go in, you'll be able to identify what your data completeness for each variable. It will be color-coded. You'll be able to hover over the red bars where you're not so good. It will give you a report of the 10 patients in that red bar, and it will tell you, and it can take you, you'll drill down, and it will tell you where in the database they are. So it will actually help you find those patients where the data are incomplete. So that's going to be available, and we'll roll it out to all of the specialties in the next year. We then are going to, we choose a number of metrics that we're trying to push for quality improvement every year, and we're going to start giving you reports on how you're doing on those quality improvement metrics. So there'll be these, what we call fixed reports. So for cardiac surgery, we'll choose the metrics and we will give you those reports available. You'll be able to just click on them. And when you click, you'll be able to just see how you're doing continuously compared with the national average. And actually, we're going to change this chart. We're going to do you versus the national average versus the top 10 centers. So you'll, again, if we're looking to see if we can go from mediocrity to good, we want to see how the top 10 are doing and see if we can get you to stimulate your activity to be as good as the best. And then we're also going to provide you with a tool that you'll be able to look at any aspect of the database that you want to. So you'll be able to create your own mix, and you'll be able to then get your own performance for that particular metric against the national average. And you'll be able to do that online. So that will be with a live database, but this will only be effective if you guys put the data in on a continuous, as fast as you can process. So you can take a message back to your clinical leads and your managers to say the pressure's on for us to build up these audit teams and not have them broken down. You'll be able to print out tables and things for you if you'll be able to find that easier. And the last thing to say is that some people think that you can't get information out of NICOR on the research side. That's a slightly different audience to today's audience. The answer is you can. You do have to apply for it. The process is a bit clunky in terms of the governance processes. It's got to go through quite a complex process to be approved by our funders, which are HQIP, and we're trying to speed that down. So the time to get data out from an application for research is at the moment inappropriately long. Our ambition is to get it down to 6 weeks from approval to the time we give the researcher the data that they want. So that's the ambition, and we're also trying to encourage people that actually, if you're collecting information, which is good quality information in one system, and you want to do trials, and you collect the same information with a research team, you have an audit team and a research team, they're collecting the same information into a research database, why don't you just put them all together and do it all through one system? So you can actually run trials through the registries, and you can do it much cheaper than a conventional trial. You can do it much more effectively. And if you're doing it for all comers, of course, you can get a much more cohesive group of patients into those trials. So we're doing a little bit of work behind the scenes to improve the research applications as well. So what does NICOR do, the National Institute for Cardiovascular Outcomes Research? It runs the National Cardiac Audit Program, so too many acronyms. So the NCAP is the audit program within NICOR. So it brings together the clinical expertise we need to try and deliver the programs. We're trying to hire a harmonized view across all of these programs. It's focusing now on quality improvement rather than just end-of-year reports. It's developing tools that help you to get better and to see your own information, but it does require contemporary data in, and we'll give you contemporary data out. We've had a methodological review of the COP program. We'll certainly do all we can to help you. So there is a help desk, but if you have trouble with the help desk or it's not available, then you can always contact people like Anthony and the other project managers, and we'll also help clinical researchers with any problems they've got with data applications. Thank you very much.